I used to believe that real love was unshakable. That when two people vowed to stand by each other, through thick and thin, through sickness and health, it meant something permanent. My entire world revolved around that belief, around her, around us. 4 years, I was convinced we had something rare, something unbreakable. No, I knew we did. I saw it in the way she used to look at me when we first met, in the way we could talk for hours about anything and everything. I felt it in the quiet moments before we fell asleep, when she'd reach for my hand without a word, as if just needing to feel my presence. Those small, simple gestures were proof that what we had was real. But tonight, all of that came crashing down. It had started like any other evening. I had been away for the weekend, visiting my parents in another state, a last-minute trip. She told me she couldn't come because of work, and I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? In all the years we had been together, she had never given me a reason to doubt her. My flight landed earlier than expected. Instead of telling her, I decided to surprise her. It was something we did for each other. Whenever one of us returned from a trip, we'd bring the other a little something, just a small token to say I missed you, I thought of you. So I stopped at a little cafe near the airport and picked up her favorite drink, feeling almost giddy at the thought of seeing her face light up when I walked through the door. But the moment I pulled into our driveway, something felt off. The house was mostly dark, except for a dim light glowing from our bedroom window. At first, I figured she had just gone to bed early. But then, as I reached for the front door, my eyes caught sight of another car parked a few houses down. It wasn't one I recognized, but I brushed it off. Maybe a neighbor had visitors. Maybe I was just being paranoid. The second I stepped inside, though, my stomach twisted. The air was different, too still, too heavy. It was the kind of silence that didn't belong in a home, the kind that made your instincts scream at you to turn around. I took a slow breath, trying to shake the unease, and made my way quietly upstairs. And then, I heard it. A voice. A man's voice. Muffled, but unmistakable. Followed by a soft laugh. Her laugh. I froze at the bottom of the stairs. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe she was watching TV. Maybe she was on the phone. Maybe I had just misheard. But deep down, I already knew. My hands trembled as I climbed the steps, my legs suddenly heavy, as if my body itself was trying to keep me from facing the truth. The bedroom door was slightly open. The light spilled into the hallway, painting thin lines of gold across the floor. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. And there she was. Not alone. The air inside that room was thick with the kind of tension that only comes from being caught. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She gasped, yanking the sheets up to cover herself, her face instantly draining of color. The man beside her? He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me with this blank indifference, as if I were an inconvenience rather than a man whose world had just been torn apart. Rachel was the first to speak. "It was just a mistake," she blurted, her voice shaking. "A one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. That word. Nothing." She reached for me, but I took a step back before she could touch me. I couldn't. Not after this. Her voice cracked as she pleaded, "We don't have to let this destroy everything. Please, we can talk about this." The coffee cup in my hand slipped, crashing to the floor. Forgotten. I had prepared for so many things in life, but this wasn't one of them. I had no idea what to do next. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the wreckage of what used to be my life. Time stopped making sense. Seconds, minutes, hours, all blending together into one unbearable moment. Rachel was still clinging to the sheets, her hands trembling. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way her mind was racing to find the right words, the right excuse, some way to undo what had just happened. But there was no undoing this. And the man beside her? He didn't look panicked. He didn't look guilty. He looked bored. Like he was just waiting for this to be over so he could go back to whatever meaningless life he crawled out of. That indifference made my skin crawl. My heartbeat was erratic, thundering in my ears. My breath came in shallow gasps. I wanted to say something, to scream, to do something, anything, but I just stood there, my mind struggling to process the truth staring me in the face. And then Rachel spoke again. "It's not what you think." I let out a short, bitter laugh. Not what I think. What part of this isn't exactly what it looks like? I asked, my voice hoarse. The half-naked man in our bed. The lingering scent of sweat and perfume in the air. The way she was still desperately trying to cover herself, as if a thin sheet could erase what I had just seen. It was a mistake, she said quickly, her voice desperate now. It happened once. Just once. It didn't mean anything. That word again. Nothing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. The woman I married. She would never have done this. She would never have destroyed us like this. The woman I married was kind, devoted, loyal. But maybe that woman never really existed at all. Who is he? I finally asked, and I barely recognized my own voice. Rachel flinched. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she couldn't decide whether to lie or tell me what I already knew. The man beside her, the stranger in my bed, was the one who answered. "Name's Jason," he said casually, like we were shaking hands at a dinner party instead of standing in the middle of my ruined marriage. "Sorry, man. Didn't know she was married." Liar. I could tell by the way he said it, the way he looked at me, that he knew exactly who I was. Maybe he even got a thrill out of it. Rachel snapped her head toward him. "Shut up." But the damage was already done. I exhaled sharply, my fingers clenching and unclenching at my sides. I needed to get out of there. My body finally caught up with my brain, and I turned on my heel, marching down the stairs. I heard her calling my name, her footsteps pounding behind me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my keys, my coat, my wallet. "Wait," she sobbed. "Please don't leave like this. Let's talk." I paused at the door, turned back, and when I met her eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just guilt. Not just regret. Fear. And that's when it hit me, she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of what I was going to do next. Without another word, I walked out the door. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to clear my head. 12 years. 12 years of love, of trust, of believing in a future that never really existed. I slid into my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. But all I could see was them. The tangled sheets. The way she scrambled to cover herself. The smirk on his face. I started the engine. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away. From the house, from her, from the image of them tangled in our bed. My phone started buzzing in the cup holder. Rachel. I let it ring. Then came the text messages. Rachel, please come home. We need to talk. Rachel, I made a mistake. Please just talk to me. A mistake. That word made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. A mistake is missing a doctor's appointment. Cheating. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Another call. Another text. Rachel, I love you. I don't want to lose our family. I scoffed. She didn't want to lose our family? Was that supposed to be a joke? Because she sure as hell hadn't thought about our family when she invited Jason into our bed. I kept driving. The city blurred past me, streetlights casting long streaks of light across the windshield. Everything felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life, some other man's nightmare. I pulled into a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner, staring blankly at the neon open sign flickering in the window. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't go home. I needed a place to sit, to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an old man sipping coffee in the corner. I slid into a booth, running a hand down my face. A waitress walked up, notepad in hand. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, the kind of woman who had probably seen her fair share of broken men sitting in diners at odd hours of the night. "Long night?" she asked, giving me a knowing look. I let out a dry laugh. "You could say that. Coffee?" I nodded. She poured a cup and lingered for a second, watching me like she was debating whether to say something. Then, finally, "You okay, hon?" I looked up at her. What was I supposed to say? "No, I'm not okay. I just walked in on my wife screwing another man in our bed. I just lost everything I thought I had." Instead, I forced a nod. "Yeah, just tired." She didn't look convinced, but she gave me a small smile and walked away. I stared down at the steaming cup of coffee, watching the swirls of heat curl into the air. And for the first time in 12 years, I realized I had no idea who Rachel really was. Maybe I never did. I must have sat in that booth for hours. The coffee went from steaming hot to lukewarm, then cold. I barely touched it. The waitress passed by a few times, casting curious glances my way, but she didn't push. Maybe she'd seen men like me before, guys sitting in diners at odd hours, staring at nothing, looking like their entire world had just imploded. And mine had. I wanted to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding. That maybe I had misread the situation. That there was some kind of explanation that could make it all make sense. But I had heard her. I had seen her. And there was no coming back from that. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out reluctantly, my thumb hovering over Rachel's name. Missed calls, 10. Unread messages, 18. "Rachel, please, just come home." "Rachel, I can explain everything." "Rachel, it wasn't serious. It was just a stupid moment of weakness." "Rachel, I love you. I don't want to lose our family." The words felt like acid. I scrolled further. "Rachel, where are you? Are you okay? Rachel, please don't do anything reckless. Rachel, I'm scared." Scared of what? That I'd tell people? That I'd leave and never come back? Or was she scared because deep down, she knew this wasn't just a mistake, this was who she really was? I locked my phone and shoved it into my pocket. I didn't want to go home. That house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaustion sinking into my bones. I had nowhere to go. No plan. Just a sinking feeling that my life as I knew it was over. The diner door chimed, and I glanced up instinctively. A man walked in, mid-40s, suit slightly wrinkled, looking like he'd had a long night. He slid onto a stool at the counter, rubbing his face before ordering a coffee. For some reason, he felt familiar. And then, without meaning to, my mind drifted back to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. My father. I was just a kid when my mother left him. But I remember the night she packed her bags. I remember him sitting in a diner just like this one, staring into his coffee like it held the answers to a life he didn't understand anymore. I used to hate him for it. For not fighting harder. For letting her go. For falling apart instead of pulling himself together. And now I understood. This is what it felt like. Like your entire world had flipped upside down, and you had no idea how to put it back together. I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the table. I wasn't my father. I wouldn't let this destroy me. But I also couldn't pretend that things could ever go back to the way they were. Rachel had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I slid out of the booth, tossing some cash onto the table. I had spent the last 12 years believing in a lie. It was time to figure out who I was without her. And the first step. I wasn't going home. I drove for hours. Not toward anything, just away. Away from that house. Away from her. Away from the life I thought I had. The city lights blurred past me. The streets were mostly empty, silent, except for the occasional late-night driver. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I barely noticed. I wasn't ready to face it yet. The reality. The questions. The decisions I'd have to make. At some point, exhaustion crept in. I was running on fumes, mentally, emotionally, physically. I needed to stop. Not at a motel, not on a friend's couch. Just somewhere I could sit and exist for a little while without thinking. That's how I ended up parked in front of the house I grew up in. My mother still lived there. After she left my father, she kept the house. Said it was hers now. I hadn't visited much over the years. Our relationship was complicated. Too much history. Too many unspoken words between us. But right now, I had nowhere else to go. I killed the engine and sat in the driveway for a long time before finally stepping out. The house looked the same, but smaller somehow. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I had grown too much to fit inside its walls. I knocked twice. A light flickered on inside. A few moments later, the door opened. There she was. My mother. Her graying hair was pulled into a loose bun, her expression unreadable as she took me in. She looked tired, but sharp, like she was reading between the lines of a book I hadn't even written yet. She didn't look surprised to see me. "It's late," she said simply, folding her arms. "Yeah." She raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." "Yeah." She studied me for a long moment, then let out a sigh and stepped aside. "Well, come in before the neighbors think I'm harboring a fugitive." I stepped inside. The house smelled the same, like cinnamon and old books. A scent buried so deep in my childhood memories that it nearly knocked me over. I sat down on the couch, running a hand over my face. I didn't even know where to start. Mom sat across from me, waiting. She didn't rush me. She never did. Finally, I exhaled. Rachel cheated. No embellishments. No details. Just the raw, ugly truth, laid bare between us. She didn't react the way I expected. No gasp, no outrage. Just a slow nod, like she had seen this coming long before I did. "How long?" she asked. "She says once." I don't believe her. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers together. "And what are you going to do about it?" That question, the one I had been avoiding since the moment I walked out of that house. What was I going to do? I should have had an answer. A plan. A decision. But all I felt was this endless, aching nothingness. "I don't know." She nodded again, like she understood. "Your father didn't know either," she said after a pause. I stiffened. I didn't want to talk about him. Not now. Not ever. "He let it destroy him," she continued, ignoring the tension in my face. "He thought if he just waited, just forgave, just loved her enough, she'd come back to him." She let out a humorless chuckle. "But she didn't. And he wasted years, trapped in a marriage that was already dead." I swallowed, my throat dry. "You think that's what I'm doing?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she met my eyes and asked the one question I had been too afraid to ask myself. "If she could do this to you once, could you ever trust her not to do it again?" That was the real question, wasn't it? Not why she did it. Not how she justified it. Not even what it meant. But could I ever lay in bed next to her again and not wonder if she was lying? Could I ever look at her and not hear her voice whispering to someone else? Could I ever let my guard down again without feeling like a fool? I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Mom watched me for a moment, then stood up and grabbed a blanket from the hallway closet. "Get some sleep," she said, draping it over the back of the couch. "Tomorrow, you figure out what comes next." I nodded, though sleep felt impossible. As she walked away, she hesitated. Then, in a softer voice, she added, "You deserved better than this. You know that, right?" She didn't wait for a response. She didn't say good night. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since I walked into that bedroom, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was angry. Rachel had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. It felt like I was stuck in limbo, not in my old life, not in a new one, just existing. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the smell of coffee and the soft shuffle of my mother moving around in the kitchen. Morning light spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room. For a second, I forgot. For a second, I wasn't the guy whose wife had betrayed him. But then, reality came crashing back. I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff from sleeping on the couch. My phone was still in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out. 16 missed calls. 32 messages. I exhaled, unlocking the screen. Rachel's texts had gone from desperate to angry to something dangerously close to entitled. Rachel, I don't deserve to be ignored like this. Rachel, we are married. You don't just disappear. Rachel, you need to come home so we can fix this. Fix this. Like she had knocked over a damn lamp and all we needed was some glue and patience to put it back together. I scrolled further. Rachel, the kids are asking where you are. Rachel, I told them you had to leave for work. Rachel, don't make me be the bad guy here. That one hit harder than I expected. Our kids. They had no idea. Right now, they were probably sitting at the breakfast table, waiting for me to walk through the door like I always did. Expecting things to be normal. Expecting me to be dad. Did I owe it to them to go back? Could I even look at them without breaking? I ran a hand over my face, my mind spiraling in a dozen directions at once. I didn't hear my mother walk up behind me until she placed a cup of coffee on the table. She's not going to stop, she said simply. I sighed. Yeah. She sat across from me, studying my face carefully. So, what's the plan? I stared at my coffee. I don't know. That was the truth. I should have had a plan. I should have known exactly what I needed to do next. But I felt like a man lost at sea, no land in sight, no compass to guide me. Well, she said after a long pause, if you don't have a plan, maybe it's time to make one. I left an hour later. Not because I was ready, but because I couldn't sit still anymore. I had a choice to make, and avoiding it wasn't going to help. I drove around aimlessly, watching people go about their lives, laughing, talking, walking their dogs, holding hands. None of them knew that my life had imploded. None of them cared. And maybe that was the hardest part. I wasn't special. I wasn't unique. I was just another guy with a broken heart and a marriage in ruins. At some point, without realizing it, I ended up parked outside my own house. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel as I stared at the front door. It looked the same as it always had, red paint slightly chipped, porch lights still on from the night before, Rachel's car in the driveway. Everything looked normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Through the window, I could see movement. Rachel. She was pacing back and forth, phone in her hand, her expression tight. I took a deep breath and forced myself to open the car door. My legs felt heavy as I walked up the steps. My keys felt foreign in my hand as I unlocked the door. The second I stepped inside, she turned to me, eyes red and puffy from crying. "Oh my God," she breathed, rushing toward me like she was about to throw her arms around me. "You're here." I took a step back. Her face crumpled. "Where were you?" she whispered. "Thinking," I said simply. She swallowed hard, glancing toward the stairs, as if afraid the kids would hear. I made breakfast. Your favorite. We can sit down, talk, and—" "No." The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. She flinched. "Please. Can we talk?" I took a slow breath. "Fine. Let's talk." But she wasn't going to like what I had to say. Rachel stood frozen in the hallway, fingers twisting together, eyes darting everywhere except at me. The same woman who once spoke with confidence about everything, our future, our kids, even what color to paint the damn kitchen, now looked like a trapped animal. She had every right to be afraid. Because for the first time in our entire marriage, I wasn't afraid to walk away. "Let's talk," I repeated, stepping inside and shutting the door behind me. She nodded quickly, exhaling like she had just been given permission to breathe. "Okay. Good," she said, voice shaking. "Good. Let's sit down." I didn't move. "I'm fine right here." She flinched at my tone, not loud, not angry. Just empty. She nodded, hands still trembling. Finally, she met my eyes. "I know I hurt you," she started, voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to understand, it wasn't about us." I stared at her. "Not about us." She took a shaky breath. "It was stupid. It was a moment of weakness. I wasn't thinking. It just happened. And the second it was over, I regretted it." I let out a bitter laugh. The second it was over, I repeated. She swallowed. Yes. Not when you invited him over. Her breath hitched. Not when you took your clothes off. Her lips trembled. Not when you climbed into bed with him. Tears welled in her eyes. It was just a mistake, she whispered. A horrible mistake. It didn't mean anything. I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose this. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. You already did. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I should have felt something watching her break down. Pity. Sadness. Some small part of me that wanted to take her in my arms and tell her we could fix this. But I felt nothing. 12 years. 12 years of love. Of trust. And in the end, all it took was one choice to rip it all away. You need to leave, I said finally. Her head snapped up. What? You heard me. She shook her head frantically. No. No, we can fix this. Please. I'm not asking, Rachel. Tears streamed down her face. This is my house too. Not anymore. Her breath hitched. And what about the kids? What are we supposed to tell them? That's up to you, I said flatly. But I won't lie for you. She gasped, like I had just struck her. You'd really do that? I clenched my jaw. I didn't do anything to you, Rachel. You did this to yourself. She didn't leave right away. She sat there, trembling, crying, begging me to give her another chance. But I had already made my decision. Eventually, she packed a bag. Eventually, she walked out the door. And when she did, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. I just felt empty. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to end. But it had. And there was no going back. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.